This lecture is about supporting material and citing sources in a speech. And this is for the Essentials of Speaking and Listening class. The first thing you have to look at is the type of supporting material you can have. You're required to have some sort of material that backs up what you're actually saying. There's a couple we can go over. First, there's the idea of an example. So if you want to make a point, you use an example. And an example is just a short little blurb used to explain something, a specific instance. So if I were to say, oh my goodness, can be very dangerous. For example, my Uncle Bob tripped down the stairs the other day. So they're very dangerous. Now, that isn't really great evidence, but it gives you an example of an example, very short. The other idea is like a narrative. And a narrative is more about story. Where an example is to say, oh, my Uncle Bob tripped down the stairs. That's an example. A narrative might be, yesterday morning, my Uncle Bob opened the door. It was a nice day, and he thought he was going to have a nice weekend. But then, something happened. He took 2 steps, stepped out onto his stairs, the floorboard cracked, and he fell down, tumbling. Before he knew it, he was on his front lawn, and his leg was twisted in an awkward way. He had twisted his ankle. He was going to need to have to go to the doctor. All right, well that's a story. We're telling we're storytelling there. So there's the idea of narrative involved. Okay, so it's different than an example. You kind of elaborate a little bit more. You're telling a story. So there's an example. There's a narrative. There's also the idea of a testimony. Um, people that's when people are reporting on what they saw. So you asked, it's people tell what happened or what they saw or what they thought about something. That's a testimony. You're getting people's opinions. Whereas an example might be something explaining something like Michael Bob stepped off stairs, therefore it's dangerous. A narrative might be telling a story. A testimony is someone saying, listen, this is what I saw, this is what I thought. And so they're kind of giving some weight to that, to whatever you're trying to say. Now, most of the time, you want to have some sort of expert testimony. You don't want to have any old random person telling what they thought or what they saw, unless it's somebody who is credible, right? An expert. But if there isn't anything there, you may want to use what we call lay people. Maybe something that happened there. But most of the time, you definitely want to use experts. There's also facts and statistics, and these can get people confuse these, but they're very different. Facts are concrete things like dates, times, people, places, events, things that there is no argument over. Statistics, on the other hand, it's data that is summarized or comparing or predicting things. Statistics shows information in a graph, in a chart, in a number, ways to analyze it. Facts are simply what something is. There is no analysis over facts. You can analyze and make statistics and do things differently with it, but facts are just what they are. So those are the types of things that you can use in your speech to kind of back up what you're trying to say. Examples of something to help show what you're trying to say, a story to help elaborate on something, testimony, expert testimony. So a lot of times you can find those experts. What do they say on the issue? And then there's specific facts about something. And then there's also statistics that can summarize information, compare this to that, or predict what might happen. All those things are really good points for supporting material. So where do you get information? Where do you get your supporting material to help out with your speech? You can get them in lots of different areas. You can get in books. I know, crazy, old school. Go to the library. There's lots of good information in there. The librarians will be so happy to see you. Read up. Read up on some books. You can find a lot of good things on there. The problem with books is that they're not up to date. So anything, obviously, published afterwards, it's not up to date in that. Which is why, and also for ease, people will tend to go to electronic sources. You can also use newspapers or news networks. Those are updated frequently. You do have to watch for bias, and I know most people have heard this spiel before, but honestly, you do have to watch for bias. most newspapers or news networks do have some sort of political leaning, and you want to double check that. So if you know something is specifically leaning one way or the left, one right or left, conservative or liberal, you do want to double check everything, and for the most part, you always want to double check things. And how do you do that? Cross-reference it. Go check out different sites, different reports. See what's going on. If it seems pretty clearly slanted one way or the other, you may want to make sure that the information is accurate from a different source. If you can't find another source that backs up what one source is saying, that's probably a bad sign. Okay. Some sources to watch out for newspapers and news networks. I mean, you always get hear the stories about Fox News being a very conservative, slanted, and it is. But there's also more liberal sources that are also very slanted towards their political means, such as MSNBC, Huffington Post. So those sources aren't necessarily bad because you have to analyze what's going on there. Um, but you do, but a lot of time they are. So you really have to be very careful when you're doing that. So when you're looking at newspapers and news networks, please, 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 please watch out for bias. Okay, if it's an editorial or an opinion piece, you might want to steer clear. If they're just reporting facts or statistics, you may be a little safe. But again, use those sources at your own discretion. Use caution. You can use magazines or journals, things that have reported on things. If you're trying to find information about a sports topic, Sports Illustrated, definitely a great thing. Try to find something about something big thing going on in the world, something like Newsweek or Time Magazine. All good stuff, all good stuff. Or journals, so academic journals, if you're trying to find information about something that relates to it. So you're doing a speech on um, interpersonal communication. There's lots of stuff in it. I can point you in the right direction. Um, those things are called periodicals because they are released periodically. So by the month, or every 6 months, or every year, or every 2 months, periodically they have a release. So whenever someone says periodicals, if you didn't know, that means a magazine or a journal. Those are good spots to find supporting material. Some of my favorite spots are reports from the government or research centers. The U.S. government has tons of good information that they have. I mean, they have a center or a research group for pretty much anything, department for something, and they have a lot of good reports and information. Sometimes it's rather dense, the reports they put out, but other times they make it easy to understand for the general public, and that's something you can really use. So if you're looking for statistics or information specifically about the American public or anything like that that's related to us, I bet the government has something. So go take a look at that. There's also lots of good research centers. One of my favorite is the Pew Research Center, PEW, the Pew Research Center. There's lots of good think tanks and groups that do research and put it out there for people to use and use for their research and speeches and papers and that sort of thing. So you should look into that too. Those are really some really good stuff. Um, Interviews. Interviews are really good for collecting testimonies when reporting on what people say, experts. This is a good example. A good example of when to use this is, say you were reading a newspaper article and someone was cited in that, and they said something. You go, oh, that would be a really good person. I'd like to know more. Well, you could write an email to that person and say, hey, I'm doing this. Could I get something? Could I get 5 minutes of your time to ask you a couple questions? Or you send a couple questions via email. Those are interviews. And that's good stuff because that's direct communication with a source rather than relying on a newspaper to do that. You can dig up and get your own source. And you get a lot of credibility with an audience if you do your own interviews and get your own information, which is kind of cool. So. And then, of course, you can always use websites, but you have to use credible organizational websites, things that make sense that aren't going to be um, random things. Okay, they need to be credible. They need to be credible. A good way to go about doing this is using what we call the CRAP test, and which is talking about if it's current, if it's relevant. You take a look at the author, the accuracy, and the purpose of the site. The CRAP test. It's awesome. You should take a look at what the crap test is. You need to take a look at if it's the information on the website is current. So if it's out of date, why bother even looking at it? It's currently probably not good information. Is the information relevant with what you're talking about? Just because it might be something that's interesting, does the website might be interesting or cool looking, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be what you need. You need to take a look at who wrote it. Okay, are they credible? Are they an expert? Do they have the the chops to write it? Should we trust them? What are their intentions? All those things. Accuracy. Double check the information. Make sure it works. Make sure other sites are saying this. Other sources are saying similar things. And then, of course, take a look at the purpose of the site. We always talk about is it a .gov or a .org or a .com or a .edu. You can generally more likely to trust the .edus because they're educational. .org just means it's an organization. That doesn't mean anything. Some organizations are more trustworthy than others. And so if I'm doing a speech on blood donation, the Red Cross, probably a good source to talk about. But anybody can have a .org or a .com. So you got to be very careful about that. So you do have to take a look at the purpose of the site. The crap test. Take a look at it. It's really good stuff. The other thing you have to be wary of when you do your research online is the idea of the filter bubble. When you do a website, when you search for something, say you go on Google and search for something, and I go on Google and search for something, we could search the exact same thing and come up with very different results. Okay. What I want you to do is Google filter bubble real quick. Take a look at what it's all about. The filter bubble creates a it creates a bubble around you on the internet. So our computers and our search engines and our programs are designed to make sure that we see things that we want to see, and not necessarily things that will help us. So you should be wary of the filter bubble. The good way to fight this is to click beyond that first page when you're looking at stuff. Don't just Google something and click on the first 2 links and call it good. Go past the first couple things. Go past the first couple pages. Have a friend search on different computers. Search on different things like that. You're gonna find that your results will be very different. You don't want to be stuck in that bubble because Google and other search engines and your computer itself will be your search history, your IP address. All those things filter out information because the internet and companies are trying to get things that you like, and you're more likely to use their stuff if you get things that you like. So you got to be very, very careful of the filter bubble. So take a look at the crap test and the filter bubble. Very good things to think about when we're talking about websites and locating supporting material. So you got your sources, things to back you up, your supporting material. You need to cite your sources in your speech. Okay, the things that you need to do, you need to cite the source and the date of the source when it was published, because that tells us the relevancy. Okay, the source will also do that. Also tell us the relevancy and the current if it's current. Now a lot of people will say, well, I need the author, right? I'm supposed to cite the author. I say, what does it add? What does it add to citing the source? Do I need to know the author? And the answer to that is, most of the time you do not need the author. Why? Why only the source and the date? Here's why. The audience would need to, if they wanted to, should be able to go back and find the information that you are citing. So, for example, if I was citing a book and I said the title of the book, the 2013 book entitled blank, if I went and Googled that, I could find it. I don't need the author. If I went and you cited a article from the New York Times on January 4th, 2015 about, and you tell me what it's about, and with a statistic, I bet I could Google New York Times, that date, and whatever you were talking about, I bet I could find it. I don't need to know the author. Okay? It's superfluous information. Now, you can add the author if it helps with credibility. So if I was citing an article and it was written by like the foremost person on genetic engineering and my speech was on genetic engineering, yeah, I might want to say that this article is really important and guess who wrote it? So it really helps with your credibility. But most of the time, an author isn't needed when you're citing sources. You really don't need to do that. What you really need to do, focus on the source and the date. Okay, but what does that look like? Here's some examples. According to the Spur of April 2013, the number of blah, 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 blah. The number of points lost due to improper use of in-speech citations last year was over 4.6 million at the SMSU campus alone, states the April 2013 issue of the Spur. You should probably cite the specific date if it's possible. Unless something is only released every month or every year, you can just cite that. If there's a date associated, specific date, you probably should do that too. You want to integrate it into your speaking. Okay, you want to vary it up too. There's a couple of you can keep reading here, but there's plenty of ways to do that. Okay, if you cite something previously, you can kind of go back and say, okay, the article goes on to explain. Here's another thing. I'm citing my source again, but I don't have to cite the entire thing because I just cited it. You could do that, but you need to vary it up. Okay, you can't just say this source said this, this source said this, this source said this. You're gonna try to vary it up. Have some style. Have some style in the way you cite your sources. What you should not do is give us information and say that came from this source. Come on, show some style. Mix it up a little bit. Try to find ways that you can integrate citing your source and the date of the source into what you're talking about. It seems a little clunky when you start doing it. I know it will. But it helps the audience if they want to go back and find it. And also lets us know that you're actually doing research, that you're citing something, that this information that you're telling us isn't just made up. You have evidence to back it up. Now, yes, you have your works cited page when you hand in it for like a speech, but the audience can't look at that and they won't know. So you've got to be able to cite your sources to help with your credibility as a speaker. And you got to be able to integrate it into your normal vocabulary, not just here's some information and I got that from. No. Incorporate it into how you normally speak. It's going to take some practice. That's okay. But try to integrate it into how you would speak and vary up the ways in which you cite things. There's lots of different ways to do it, and hopefully these examples here are kind of ways that you can show how you can do that. There's lots of different ways to do it. This is just a couple of examples, lots of different ways. But don't just give us information and say that comes from this, or post a citation on PowerPoint. No, that's not how to cite things. You need to orally cite it out loud for the audience to hear. So this has been a short lecture about supporting material, where to find it and what it is, and how to properly cite the sources that you got that from. Hopefully it's been helpful for you and you can integrate that into your speeches.